Welcome, dear tester community, to another episode of the Agile Test Bar. My name is Sebastian.
Hello, and my name's Moritz.
And we are here today to talk about performance testing. You might have noticed by now that this episode will be held in English. The reason for that is because we have a special guest today. This guest is Leandro Melendez, also known as Senor Performo.
Hallo amigos, hallo meine Freunde. Es freut mich sehr, hier bei Ihnen zu sein. Es tut mir leid, meine Deutsch ist nicht sehr gut. Dann vielleicht wir besser in Englisch sprechen. It's a pleasure to be here with you, my amigos.
Yeah, thank you very much for being here. Leandro is an enthusiast in performance testing. He's very famous for his countless conferences he's appeared in as a speaker or as an attendant. He's also author of the Hitchhiking Guide for Load Testing, a very entertaining guide for load testing projects.
To start off, can you briefly say us anything about your person and how do you come to performance testing?
Yeah, of course. Well, I think like as most performance engineers, I ended up in performance testing kind of by accident. I started my life as a developer. I ended up in several different areas of IT, DBA, infrastructure, project management. And then I ended up in a company where, given my skills, all I knew was that I was going to be traveling a lot as an on-site consultant. I didn't even know what was testing or done it like consciously. And given my skills, I was assigned to the performance testing area, and pretty much that's how I ended up in this trade.
And do you still remember one of the first performance test projects?
Well, I think one of my first experiences with performance testing may have been without me knowing it. We were on the early days developing. As I said, I was mostly delivering projects rather than being on the testing side. And some of those projects had to perform well, be fast, snappy, because we were dealing in the stock market and stock options and all those type of things. So we had to assure that it was performant and that it could take a few, not that much, but a volume of information. But those were just delivering the project with quality, trying to get it as best as possible. But I think my first encounter was a big one with this was a load testing project, several hundreds of thousands of virtual users playing an online video game where I had to mix up a bit of artificial intelligence with the scripts. They were playing Scrabble against each other. It was such a challenge, but a great experience.
That sounds awesome.
Totally.
So we know you've been running your Senor Performo blog for several years now. How did the idea for it come along? And do you think it paid off?
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, as a starting with, I have to say, yes, it paid off very well. The reason why I'm here in part. But as a starting point, as a consultant, when I was going to many customers, trying to make them understand what was performance testing or load testing, what I was about to do, I came up with examples that probably many know me for my colorful examples, to call it in a way. But I got tired after customer repeating the same stories or coming up with new ones. I was like, why don't I write it up to distribute it wider, easier, or even send them those writings? So that's how I created the persona, started as Senor Performo. And from that, everything evolved into getting into the podcast, coming to conferences, coming up with my YouTube channels, English and Spanish, public speaking, and also being invited to nice podcast interviews and cool talks like the ones that we are having right now.
So it really helped in alleviating the pressure from these questions. So after you started your blog, did you really see a decline in these questions? So did your customers and clients really read the blog beforehand?
No, not well. Some of them, I have to admit, but the things deviated a little bit into trying to help people, trying to share the knowledge, not only with my customers, but it became like a good giving back to the world. Like I know it sounds like a little bit kumbaya thing, but it's it became a way to giving back. And of course, the questions grew up because many more people were coming like, hey, and what is this throughput thing? And what is this response time? And why shouldn't I slam the system right there and there with 1 billion users and things like that? So it was a double-edged situation, which I'm very happy about.
No, but one thing I think that should be mentioned is that it also helps the other load and performance testers out there prepare better for the questions should they come up again in their projects. So
yeah, no, and if I may, also it helps the people that cannot explain to management some of the situations and why they are doing things in load test or general performance tests. With some of my examples, which I try to make them very appealable so that everyone will understand complex performance topics.
thank you very much. So how do you define load and performance testing? I know that in my personal experience, they are very closely linked together, but I know that you really like to separate them and not group them together under one single thing.
Yeah, I could say I have a big fight or enterprise towards making that the community understands that there's a big difference in between performance and load testing. To me, performance testing is, as the definition that I use, is the action of validating, verifying, observing, and knowing, the part of testing. And the part of performance is the speed, the response time, the efficiency of our software under different circumstances. One of these circumstances is load, but there are many other circumstances. And the problem is that many organizations, as soon as they hear performance testing, they all think of load and slamming the system, trying to bring it down, reach their limits. And there are so many other things that should be done before in terms of general performance testing that I think that's the biggest thing that I am tackling right now, trying to let people understand that performance testing is a big entity with many practices, and load testing is only one of those. I generally give the example of saying performance testing is the whole Office suite, and load testing may be just Microsoft Word. But there are many other components to it. We must use them all.
And what challenges do you think we have in performance testing at the moment?
Oh, well, there are multiple challenges in terms of performance testing. There are organizations, as a starter, who do not understand it and do not know very well what to do. For them, it's just a check box in their projects. And on top of that, we are evolving. We are changing in methodologies, in technologies, in ways of doing software. We have agile and continuous. We have services, microservices, all these new tiers and solutions. And we have the cloud. Only those three, because I won't get into Internet of Things and artificial intelligence. Just those three things are making a huge difference on how we do performance testing. Many organizations and many performance testers are also stuck to the old ways of doing performance, just load testing, and some of these practices that I mentioned earlier. And I think that's one of the things that may be generating more difficulties for them.
And when you look back to your experience of about 10 years performance testing, what are the changes in the performance testing? What is it different against the past?
I think I kind of already spoiled this question a little bit because, as I said, when I started in performance testing almost 15 years ago, the way that you thought of performance was very different. The applications were monolithical. The software was heavily front-end oriented, many Windows applications or desktop applications. The browser was heavy in terms of state, and the scripts were very different. You focused mostly on load, and that has changed completely. It has been evolving. I think that's another big one, that the applications are not monolithical anymore. We can get changes to them. We should get changes on them continuously with our service tiers. And the way that we think on at least how to automate and how to performance test the system also has switched completely. Before, as I said, we had long steps, end-to-end, big, long test cases. Now we should focus mostly on the service. I have another example for this, like if you were in a restaurant before where you have multiple times in your meal, like first plate, entry, then the dessert, then probably a digestive if you want some tequila afterwards, I don't know. If you wanted to test only the tequila or the dessert, you had to go through the previous steps. Now with services, you can go straight to the tequila or straight to the dessert, and you should know how much of each one of those. Your scripts must be punctual on those different steps. Instead of a restaurant with multiple steps, you're on a food court. You can go directly to one of the restaurants, to the dessert, to the ice cream one, to get some good currywurst directly without doing all the other steps. I think those are some of the big differences. Together with monitoring, I mean, the list is endless, but big changes have happened in the last years.
And with your experience, you see a lot of tools. Can you say if you have a favorite tool for load testing?
That's a tough question that I get often, because I cannot, subjectively, I grew up with Loadrunner, and it has a place in my heart. I don't know if it's a Stockholm syndrome or it was an awesome experience. But I generally give this answer, like personally I try to not to have favorites, because that doesn't help. You need to be able to choose the right weapon depending on the battle that you are doing. Or let's say, even as music, what is my favorite music? Well, it depends on what I'm doing. Am I having a meal at a restaurant? I want something, De Ipanema Girl at the bottom, not too distracting. If I am in a reunion with friends, probably I want some rock or some pop music going on. If I'm reading, I prefer classical or something that encourages. And the same is with performance and load testing tools. It depends a lot on what is the situation. I try to stay kind of agnostic and try to choose the best for the given circumstance. If the team is not very good at development, maybe they need something more drag and drop or codeless. If they are continuous, probably they should focus on APMing. So it's very different, and the tools that we can choose are vast, because it's not only automation. We can also do monitoring, we can also do instrumentation, we can do pipelining of our performance processes. So it's a big world out there. And I would recommend the people to not to get canned up. Try to choose the tool that gives them the best options for the current situation, but be wise. I always say you can drive a big truck or a small Volkswagen Beetle. It's the same principle. Gas, brakes, move the wheel. As long as you know that, you'll be good with almost every tool.
Okay, I see you have used the right tool in the right situation.
I hope I did. That's a tough call as well. And not on my end most of the time. Some organizations are like, we bought this tool, you have to use it. Okay, well, let's do the best we can with the tools at hand.
All right, so you've talked about your customers and clients a lot already. So when you think back of the very beginning of these projects, what did the customers and clients usually hoped to get out of these performance and load testing projects? Were there any particular points of interest they were trying to investigate?
Well,
like the majority of the time.
Yeah. No, with the customers, sadly, most of the time when we were providing services, there were two main categories of customers. The ones that didn't know at all what they just had a performance something in the project roadmap, and they just wanted to check it out. That's all they knew. They cared. Didn't even care about the results, and they would often go through, even as they checked with performance tests, we don't act on the test, but we performance tested, we're good to go. And there are others which, as I said, were obsessed with just pushing the system to its limits, trying to bring it down without checking how each one of the pieces are doing. Some of these, I often give the example of a racing car, Formula One, if you want to think about it. They don't care to test or check the wheels separately, the suspension, that there are no oil leaks. They just put it together and want to race it and test it by racing it, put it into the extreme conditions. And that's not the right approach. You need to test the components first. So some of those struggles were to make the customers understand why it matters, why they should care in different ways about performance testing, and at the same time, helping them to give me information to do accurate, good, and relevant performance tests, and for them to understand the results and be able to take actionable exercises after the test if there were any needed. Because there were some others where, like, nope, I want my weird load test trying to bring down the system with metrics that didn't make sense. After I tried 3, 4, 5 times, leave it written to explain why that's not the best choice. But in the end, they are the customer and they have to choose, and they can just pay for get the service they want.
We see it.
So in your opinion, there's no real best practice out there, like best key performance indicators, best tools. It's just really, it depends on the project and on what the customer, the clients want to find out. And that's, I guess that's something I understood so far, that you really start to, you go into dialogue with them and try to find out, what do you need, what do you want, how can we help you? There's no real, like, a list of bullet points which you just cross off in each project, and then you say, well, the project's done, you've got your results.
I would say in general, the most important to me, and what I would say it's a must or a standard practice, silver bullet, first, understand the project needs in terms of performance. I had it even in the book you referenced at the beginning that I wrote. Why? That's the very first question. Why are you wanting to performance test? Because from there you will understand what are the risks, and every system is different. Some systems may be under lots of stress for multiple users constantly. Some of them may just get that once in a year and they just have to care for that. Some others may be, I don't know, billing processes that the performance will be offline at night, and the batch processes just have to be fast enough to not to still be running on the morning when people have to come into work. So the way, and that's a question that I was brought at a client to give them a training on performance. And one of the alumni, the people learning there, always wanted like a formula, like how I do execute performance testing always. And I'm like, I know you are gonna hate this answer. I always give this to you, but it depends. Like all good questions, the answer is it depends.
Okay.
So, and you've already addressed this a little bit, performance testing in pipelines and CI/CD. How do you personally feel about that? Is it something you recommend, or is it something you would tell them to abstain from?
Absolutely. No. It's a must. I like it because it changes your mindset. And in my personal and very non-respectable opinion, I think it's an awesome new process that you can implement. Because, as I said, from the performance in the past, it was rudimentary. When you start to see the gaps and the problems with how we did those long scripts and long executions, if you manage to integrate continuous performance practices in your CI/CD, not and pardon, usually I call it the BALT, B-A-L-T, big ass load tests, which I don't recommend to have those in a pipeline. It's not even needed anymore, because if you are continuous, you already know, hopefully, you have good instrumentation monitoring, you already know the performance in production. You don't need to be doing big tests because you are just inserting changes continuously. when you do one of those big tests, is where you have an event coming that totally deserves that. So if you can integrate continuous triggers on events in your pipeline, like when a check-in happens, when some code has been updated, when there's a PR, some of those, or even continuously running at nights, you can have some of those small load tests that won't stop the pipeline. That's awesome. And you can detect things as early as possible, and it will be cheaper, it will be easier, less tears, sweat, and blood in the project, because we don't want to be suffering that much. By doing this, you'll have way less than that. And a cherry on top, all that is inheritable into production. If you generate it well, you can inherit it in production. Your SREs, your operations people can use it and keep production performing. So yeah, I think it's beautiful. You can see I'm excited.
Yeah. So it's not that much about, you said it, about load generation, but rather about monitoring the performance and comparing, maybe checking if the performance deviated after a little change or something. Just
Totally.
so no big runs, just some very small little users, few users. Yeah, I see.
Yeah, I mean, you can have some medium load tests, but that continuously run and that you can guarantee, because it's also not only monitoring, but you have also to be triggering with some automations the performance to know everything. And with this change in topology, you can almost automate every process in your system, or most of the relevant ones, as different from before, where we had to focus only on the ones that were most frequently executed. So yeah, it's awesome. I love it.
Okay, let's switch to another point in load testing or performance testing, the reporting. How do you report your tests, and which data do you pass on the customer? And especially, how do you prepare the results?
So again, this is gonna be, it depends, but the ones that I like the most is to, with modern performance techniques and modern tools, it's easier to share the results, to enable your stakeholders, project team, bosses, management, to watch the results live, to be alerted, to receive platforms where they can access it. I think I started to dislike a little bit the tools that hoard the results and the metrics. The new performance tools that share it and spread it everyone who wants to watch them. In part, that's why I liked Grafana so much. You just share a link, everyone. I don't have to build a report. I don't have, go and observe it. See what is the performance of your system live, even in production, even in development, wherever you want. And be aware. If there's something happening, we can create some alerts, your team can create them. And just when we have like the bolts like necessary to be doing those huge load tests, that's where we generate some reports where we try to figure out and find the bottlenecks. But again, those are starting to be scarce, not that often, because those big events are seldom happening for organizations, and the most common thing is that they need to know their continuous performance on a daily basis to analyze those deviations. So instead of, yes, we still do, when it's a big test, a big report with all the bottlenecks or the findings. We tell where we found issues, but never solutions, because even as I may know quite a bit of database networking, I'm not the expert. So, hey, here this part is getting slow, here this part is spiking, the memory is not being released. Probably you should ask your developers or experts to check. But lately, I rather hear, this is a link, you can get alerts, you can go and check what is the performance, and configure. I can configure for you to get emails, to get notification, SMSs when something happens. But with continuous, that's the trend, I believe.
I think so.
Yeah. So during those bigger tests, so when you sit in front of the dashboards, the Grafana dashboard, for example, and you see some bad performances coming up, you said that you don't really want to provide solutions. Do you also try to do you simply report on the bad performance, or do you also engage in the speculations like, whoa, what could it be? Is it maybe a database problem, or is there some network error? Or do you just sit back and let the developers and the maintainers do the speculations?
I mean, officially, I try to not to give specifics, and it depends because there are customers that sadly have no APMs, no instrumentation, no telemetry that can give me a way to dig down deeper. Those are the ones where I just tell, hey, this process is getting slow at this moment. I see your RAM spiking. That's as far as I can tell you, and I have no further visibility. On some others, where they have good APMs, good observability, and everything is very well wired to see inside, I can dig deeper. I always say the warning, I'm not the expert of this. I know quite a bit. I see your database here and this line when the APM tells me, because if I can dig deeper, I can tell them, hey, you have this Java process that is crashing, or the memory is being hoarded, or this area of the system is getting blocked, the network is consuming too much. I can tell them, but usually I can tell them precisely where is the problem and why, but I try to not to get into the fix. What would be the solution, or what would be the general implementation?
So when there's discussions about the results you generated during the performance test, do you also, or did you also encounter discussions about the realism and the authenticity of the results you generated? Like, did people or your customers start to doubt the results because they might be thinking, oh yeah, well, your load generators, they're like superhumans. No human can ever click this fast. Our servers in the backend might be on fire already, but it's not our problem, it's your fault.
Yeah, many times we have received blame on our scripts, and that's traditional when, in the old days, when the developers would pass the software to us, we were in another phase and doing everything, and we were finding issues. The very first thing I often got was doubt from our automations, like, hey, are your automations failing? Like the errors that you're reporting aren't from your automations? And in the past, I even had like 10-step set of guidelines for bulletproof scripting. I could almost bet, because many customers were like, yeah, we would see like 10% of errors coming from the scripts and things like that. I was like, no, I can bet you will see near zero defects from my scripts. I almost can guarantee you that anything that appears is from your system having issues. But there's another problem here, because to simulate a reasonable load test, you need two elements. What is the load situation that you want to simulate? And that was a very tough question for customers, because they were like, I don't know, I would just want to stress it. Yeah, but what is a stress situation for your system? Oh, these many users, when does that happen? And some others were requesting like, hey, can you generate a ramp up that then goes down and then goes up even higher, then down again? Like, why are you focusing on the previous ones? Let's just focus on the stressful part. And that was another challenge, explaining to them and generating realistic, because they didn't even know what was realistic. That was the last piece when I asked, like, exactly or close to a good approximation, how many times is this process that you are concerned about being triggered in a stressful time? And many of those couldn't tell me, because they were like, I think we closed 1 million invoices per month. Okay, what does that translate into a busy hour? And those type of back and forth were, I think, the biggest struggles. Once we had good information, I have to say, we applied even mathematical models to tune the pacing, the think time or wait time in between steps. And we even, I can even recommend to go to the book where I explain a little bit, like, you have to do shakeout tests and make sure that your script is generating enough load so that for the big load tests, you will be hitting, you will never hit exactly the number that you are requested, but on an average, because we have random pace times, random think times, and wait times, we try to tune them the closest as possible and try to show them, hey, you told me in production you have 100 hits per hour in this, let's say 1,000 to make it a little bit higher and realistic, 1,000 per hour. I generated 1,050. So it's close to there. It's a very good simulation. And try to provide all the data elements if they have monitors already, which is always my first suggestion. Check your monitors. Check how much did I generated. Does it match with what is your expected load? And that's where usually the any controversy is cleared out and like, yeah, you're close to there. And I have to say I'm even adamant on trying to hit those levels the best possible way.
All right, now that we've talked a little bit about failures and problems and discussions, we know that projects aren't always easy, and we would like to know what were your biggest failures?
Well, that's a tough question because I want to think, I hope none of my projects having failures, at least not from something that were in our control. There were some projects where we would arrive, and that's one of another best practices that I generated over the years. Go and check the system. Click on it, look at the developer tools, what the networking options tell you. There and then you will identify slow processes, heavy images, all those type of things that can generate performance issues, and report them right away. Many customers are super happy, like in a week you have a previous report, a preliminary report that shows, hey, I'm not gonna do this big load test that you want to do because you have this, and that failing. Again, with the car Formula One example, I won't race your car because I notice your tires are flat, you have no fuel in your tank, and probably you need to change the oil because you haven't changed it ever. And some of those projects stopped there and then. They were like, oh, okay, you can go back to your house in Mexico and we will call you later because we need to fix all these problems. They are serious. Sometimes they accept it and agree. Other projects that had not been so successful is when the customer does not accept that and they just want, I need to release the production, I need to release, just run it as it is. I like, man, your tires are flat and you have no fuel. How am I? Okay, well, let me try. And with that situation, some of them will even go into production. Even as I report like, hey, this is going to crash and burn and be a big accident and the other cars will roll over and it's going to be a bad race. They go. And I have a story of even an organization that went bankrupt because of releasing a key system without paying attention to all the recommendations. They even asked like, hey, can you tweak your load test to pass? And I'm like, oh, that's a big, I mean, you're the customer. If you put that on writing, I need to, like, I don't want to, but that's not good. You're going to have problems. No, I just need to go. Okay. I mean, after 5 or several times trying to tell them that's not right, in the end, you're the customer, put it on writing. I will report and do the test that you request me to do. So yeah, most of the times it's from kind of ignorance, lack of information, or lack of understanding of the performance exercise and what is the benefit that they will get from it. And some others is recklessness from the customers. I sadly have found a few of those.
Okay, let's show the other side of your projects. What were your greatest success or lessons learned during or after performance testing?
Well, I can think of many. As I said, that's the other side of the problem that I said earlier, where the customer doesn't understand, where they don't know or want to know. The other spectrum is where the customer is super cooperative, has all the information, the projects flow like a river very easily, very happily. I think those have been the best projects, or in recent times, the ones where we have been able to implement continuous processes. Like, hey, this is a principle. The performance people should not automate, pass it to the developers. We teach them, teach the developers how to automate, why it matters, how to do it, to integrate everything on the pipeline, to leave it running. When their continuous pipeline ends up like a very well-oiled and tuned gearbox that it keeps rolling, I think that's a very satisfactory event. And especially when the organization is on board with that, because some others, they are like, no, I know you're telling me I shouldn't script by the end of the sprint and try to do a big load test. I still wanted, okay, the ones that cooperate, they are awesome, the best projects. And I think going further in the past, the one with video games, that was also a very good experience, I have to say. Like, oh my God, I managed to pull this off. It was super complicated and the scripts were playing against each other. That was, I think, I always remember it with cherish.
Okay, and for that, what were your success factors of successful performance testing?
Well, as I would say, that one with the video game was a huge success. Hundreds of thousands of virtual users playing against each other. We found problems. We helped the organization. The game was published, and it was a pretty good success. And as I said, the others that I like a lot is when I leave and the team doesn't need me anymore because they are good at doing performance testing continuously by themselves.
All right, now, this is the question. The next question is a question which really interests me myself as well, because I would consider myself a beginner in performance testing still. And I mean, I've done 2 projects, but I would still consider myself a very much a beginner. What would you recommend to a beginner in performance testing? What kind of knowledge and skills should be acquired to rise up to the challenges you've discussed already? And is working on projects and getting first-hand experience the way to go, or is there experiences you can acquire apart from projects, like beforehand, for example, or during some courses?
It's a tough question because I have never met anyone that said, as I said, all the performers I know ended up in the trade kind of by accident or not by first choice. Wasn't like children like, yeah, I want to be a policeman. Yeah, I want to be an astronaut. Yeah, I want to be a performance tester. You would never hear that. I mean, and it's tough because the performance testing area has multiple entry points that you can access through. In my personal opinion, that may be biased by my experience, that's how I entered the trade, was scripting, creating automations for performance and load tests. What is, I think, a very good starting point, where if you need to have some development knowledge for that. Most of the, I think, I may say the best tools that I know are somewhat programmatic. Even when I started Loadrunner, you had record and replay, and you ended up with a bulky script with tons of lines of code that you needed to understand. For many that would see the code, it was just like weird characters, especially if you were recording on those weird applications like Civil, SAP, Oracle Forms. I remember those were lots of components being passed back and forth, and you needed to understand them. So I would say a good initial point is scripting. Another one is have some developer experience or understanding, because if you know the guts of the system, the back end, what is happening, you have already made progress in being a performance engineer, because you know where the information has to flow. Okay, I'm going to the database, retrieving information, posting it to the customer. I have a web front end with Angular or React, and it connects this and that. If you understand all that, I think you are very easily apt to transform into a performance engineer and start stressing that application. I mean, in my opinion, from unit testing your application, which is part of development, should be, and just triggering those methods, classes, functions that you have in your code, and triggering them from a script, the jump is almost transparent. So I would say those are the main recommendations. And the other interesting entry point that I have seen is from the business side. If you understand how much is happening and you can generate these load patterns or utilization patterns, that's a very another interesting entry point that I have seen some people successfully get deep into performance testing.
So you've said already that sharing experience and having some experienced developers on your team who know what they're doing is very, very nice to have. But how do you network as a load and performance tester? I mean, often you can how do you say, you can feed off the others' experience if they share them with you. But how do you actually reach out to other load and performance testers?
Well, that's a tough question, because I have to admit, for a while I was not reaching out, and probably if I had done some of the recommendations I'm about to give, I would be further in my performance career. Because for a while I didn't know, and just what my coworkers were mentioning, like, yeah, Keto, you script this way and you do this, and even those were not the best practices. I came up with some of them on my own, but I think the big leap I did was when I started to go into conferences, when I started to write to, I think it was Richard Feynman who said that if you can explain something really well, even to your grandmother, it means that you understand it very well. So that made me, well, I want to explain these things, I need to understand them well, and to be able to make sure that they understand them. So in between trying to learn, trying to teach, I think that's another big one. Try to teach performance will make you jump a lot. And reaching out, going to conferences, going to events, following the people that has all the knowledge or the best practices or that are starting everything. You will meet all of them or most of them in these events, in meetups, in YouTube, in podcasts like we are talking about it, and as well in books. That's minus appreciated lately, but there are so many good books on performance, load testing, best practices, projects in IT, and even some that are timeless. The Mythical Man Month, it's a 50-year-old book. You wouldn't believe how many of those things about projects in IT are still relevant. So do not underestimate the benefit of books as well. So everywhere we are surrounded by lots of information. Just don't stay in your cocoon there and don't get your head out to learn. If you just look around, you'll find lots of information. Follow people, follow podcasts, YouTube videos, conferences, meetups, events, and talks. Absolutely.
And what do you think about ISTQB certification for performance tester?
There are certifications, to me, are a double-edged sword. At times, they are very useful in two ways. They are good for you to, even when you're studying for the certification, you start learning things that, oh, I didn't know that. And that's incredibly useful. Some others, your office, the company that you work for will ask for them, and you will need them to be hired, to move on in the corporate ladder, or to get promotions or raises. And they are somewhat important in those factors. But in the other side, at times I have seen that they hurt people into trying to get the certification, even if they are not as experienced, if they don't know as well the software. Because certifications most of the time mean that you studied a lot, that you had some experience with the topic in particular, in the performance one specifically. And I think they help, but many people obsess around them. Nowadays, now that I am part with K6 here, we get requests like, hey, where can I get certified in K6? And I'm like, why don't you just first get good at it? I don't know what are you looking through the certification. We have awesome documentation. We are posting material for you to learn. Why is your organization asking you? And that's another one where a customer will ask a service company like, hey, yeah, you can, and I see that a lot with banks, hospitals, healthcare, some of these that need to certify things. Yeah, are your testers certified in K6, JMeter, Gatling, whatever they are using, or in performance testing practices? Let me get that. So they are good to have, but I would recommend do not obsess around them. When you are good and you get to a good point, most of those certifications, you will be able to pass them with your eyes closed. If you understand well the trade, focus on that, and good things will come your way there. And if needed, eventually, and if you want to test your knowledge, go and get certified.
Thank you very much. So next up, we've got a few bullet questions. It's similar to the way bullet chess, for example, is played, where you don't have much time to think about your answers. I mean, you can obviously think about them, and you can also explain yourself if you feel that these questions, that they need some kind of explanation to be answered. And I would like to start with JMeter or Loadrunner. I guess you've also talked about it.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, I cannot choose one over the other. One has characteristics that the other doesn't have, and vice versa. So, yeah, it depends on the situation.
Yeah, but you already said that close to your heart, there's always a little place for Loadrunner.
It's a weird place because I have to say I enjoyed JMeter as a lot as well, learning it, embracing it. So Loadrunner is like your first girlfriend, your first love, or something like that. But JMeter is pretty interesting as well. And as I keep finding, I mean, I cannot underestimate as well the benefits of the tool that I'm representing now. K6 is very good programmatically, and when you learn the capabilities of all the others, it's like, yeah, my first love, Loadrunner, but here now I am in a room full of pretty girls. I don't know what to do.
All right. So next up, do you prefer script development in the user interface or in source code?
I may be biased here, but I tend towards source code and programmatic development rather than codeless solutions.
And what do you think about cloud and on-premise systems?
Ooh, definitely on-premise systems are going out of the way. I think cloud is eating the market. Both have benefits, both have disadvantages. But all I can say is that the trend is becoming the cloud. I do not enjoy it. I'm going to give an example on some situations. I rather have my MP3s on my device than streaming. Everyone is streaming music now, and it's awesome to have it. It's awesome to some libraries or songs that I like. I don't have that in my MP3 list. But both of them, as I said, at times when I'm offline or when I forgot to download the streaming stuff, I'm always happy to have my offline MP3. So I'm also a little bit in between on those.
Okay. What about long-term tests and short-term tests?
I'm not sure. Can you exemplify each of them?
Yes. For example, in load testing, you can have a long-term test for hours to show the performance or the load of the system, and but you can switch, for example, and you explain it in CI/CD to shorten a test because it's not easy to see a result in the CI/CD if it takes too long.
Got it. Well, I am tilted towards shorter tests in terms of performance. There are times where you will need endurance tests, long, big-ass load tests, as I said. But nowadays, I think the most common things that you should do, I tend towards shorter, simpler, and punctual tests that will tell you information on that little bit of code that you're trying to release into production continuously.
So next up, do you prefer testing on the productive environment, or do you prefer testing on a shared testing environment with other tests running there?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Both of them are awesome, and it depends on the test. If we are doing low tests trying to bring down the system, of course, production is not a choice. But if we are doing continuous small tests, I would do them in production, and even I recommend it. Also, not only shifting left but right, and we need to get rid of all that scare and afraidness of testing in production. If you have, and that's another big if production has release techniques, rollbacks, canary, A/B testing, all these feature toggles and things that you can do to guarantee that you can conduct tests in production without killing your productivity, definitely. But if you don't, do not touch production. First, work on having these safe tests in production. And they are, once you get there, they are super efficient. You can even load test using people, real people in production with beta test or blue-green releases so that your users will do the load test for you. So I like a lot, and I'm very excited about some of those, but not all the organizations have the right processes and release techniques to deal with that.
And doing your load test meetings where you performed the load or performance tests, and I guess you held meetings as well where many people gathered around some reports, did you prefer being alone in these meetings with K6, for example, or your other companies? Or did you prefer to have the customers in the meetings with you?
I like big Doctor Strangelove style war rooms where everyone is around and we can present what are the results and everyone is involved. There's no reason to, as far as I know, to not to have the customer, even the janitor from the customer, hey, come in and understand what is the software that we're testing happening and doing. If we can present and explain that to everyone, and that's another one. For me, the biggest achievement is when I manage to explain it to everyone there and they understand and they take action.
By the way, there's a question that just appeared for me. Did you ever have to explain performance testing to your grandma?
Oh no, sadly she wasn't around when I was doing performance. But to everyone else around me, people that are not related to IT at all, I had to, and I often do some of those examples as I have already. So in a way, yes.
What do you love more, development or executing test?
Oh, yeah, vanilla or chocolate. I like ice cream anyway, so it's a tough call because, scripting, it's a whole world, it's super entertaining. But when you are executing, reading results, analyzing, becoming the detective, in both of them are awesome. I think I cannot choose both. I am addicted to both.
What do you do in more times? Interpret results or show the whole data to the customers?
I think that the most consuming time is researching and doing some of the analysis. Generally, presenting is short. In traditional load test projects, it's just 30 minutes, tops an hour. I try to keep it brief. But figuring out, putting together a report and that consumes more time, definitely.
So the second to last question is, do you prefer testing single spots only, like single API routes or endpoints, or do you prefer testing entire use cases?
That's also a tricky. My best practice answer should be try to test punctual. When you find performance issues at granular components, you almost, and I'm stealing this phrase from James Pooley, a colleague in Perfomance, who says, if you guarantee good performance for one user or for one application, one item, you are covering probably 80% of the possible causes or sources of performance issues. I totally agree with that. I think that if you, again with the car, if you tune the tires, if you tune the engine, if you change the oil, if you guarantee that every piece works, most probably the race will go well and you will detect very few items. But on the other hand, personally, it's incredibly entertaining to try to script those long steps. It's not recommended, but it's entertaining. It's super fun. I heard a story of a doctor in a medical university teaching at cataract operation for the eyes, and he was teaching the old one, not the newest one. And when the community asked, like, why are you teaching that? Because the new one is boring. The old one is super entertaining to teach. And I was like, I fall into that a little bit.
And now for our last question, do you prefer BlackBox or WhiteBox testing?
Oh, white. Totally. WhiteBox. I like to know what is inside, and it's frustrating sometimes, like throwing rocks at a pond behind the wall and just trying to figure out what is happening just by the noise. I like to see it and dig in.
I can totally understand that. So thank you very much for this short session. Before we conclude this entire session, I would also like to speak about Qytera a little bit. I would like to add a few things. We at Qytera, we also develop solutions for load and performance testing and offer services for this. So for example, we are specialized in open source tools, particularly in JMeter. And to be able to easily adapt to high loads, we have developed our own project called QLOAD, which is based on JMeter and AWS. And it's a good solution in the enterprise environment, but also in public administration and also in other online services. And if you would like to know more about that, feel free to visit our homepage and read about it. And for you, Leandro, I would really like to thank you very much for sharing all your insights and experience with us. It was very entertaining. I learned a lot from you, like really. And we are sure some of our listeners would also like to know more about you now. And is there any particular place you would like to point them to find out more about you, to see you more, to hear you more?
Well, as I mentioned, I am very active in conferences and presentations. I have social media presence. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. Not TikTok. I'm not yet ready for that. But any of those channels, you can reach out to me if you want to ask any question. I'm always happy to try to help and teach performance and any other topics around IT that I may be able to. And look out, provides in English and Spanish. We have are generating both those contents. And yeah, shoot me a note, anyone that may want to. And beware, because we are still pushing more knowledge content and things to let you learn in a fun way.
Leandro, thank you for joining us and for the very interesting insights and the fun in the session. I think we see some interesting points, and I hope we see a lot of more things from you in the future. I give the word to you, and you have a chance to say anything to our audience.
Yes, of course. To the audience, keep learning, keep growing, keep performing. In general, in QA, not only performance or IT. Don't stop. I think that's don't lose your curiosity, and keep learning and growing. And to you, my amigos, meine Freunde, thank you very much for inviting me. Vielen Dank für die Einladung. Ich hoffe, bald zurückzukommen. Und vielen Dank für alle die Leute hier im Podcast.
If anyone else from the tester community has suggestions or wants to provide us with some feedback, please write to podcast@qytera.de. And we would like to see you soon on the next episode of the Agile Test Bar.